Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the step up in Brexit protests from British farmers and explain what their campaign is about, because brexiteers are currently trying to mischaracterise it for fear of getting egg on their faces. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, all very embarrassing for the Brexit supporters. For the last few weeks, they have delighted in the protests from farmers in France and other parts of the EU, saying that, oh, this shows dissatisfaction with the EU. In a way it did, but not for the reasons they claim. And they were saying, I bet our farmers are glad we left now. Only nothing could be further from the truth. British farmers are suffering terribly from Brexit. It's just that they're rubbish at protesting. And the worst of the worst when it comes to protesting are always those with conservative leanings like farmers, because they're brought up to think, oh, unions are bad and protests are bad. And then they need to protest and they go, oh, we don't know how. But in actual fact, British farmers have now been inspired by their French cousins and have decided to step things up. They haven't been dumping hay bales and manure on the streets of the capital, and I don't think they're ready to go full French revolutionary, but they have been blockading around Dover. In fact, in a sign that they haven't yet become as confident as French protesters, there's an article in The Guardian that quoted one as saying, oh, they'd like to protest in London, but they hadn't done that because they think they'll be chased away. What? Get yourselves to London and you dare them to chase you away. That's how protests work. I've often said, I don't think protests should go quite as far as the French ones. They go overboard. They sort of, set fire to your own streets. You hurt your own communities. But absolutely challenge authority. If the government screw you over, you screw them over. That is the essence of the French spirit of protest. Find out what the government don't want you to do and do it. And the interesting thing is they're both protesting against the same thing, the farmers on the continent and the farmers in Britain. It's competing with cheaper imports from outside the EU. Now, in reality, what they're wanting in France and other countries is either more support for their own production or more resistance to those imports. I suppose you could say the same thing of the British farmers as well. There are anti-EU elements within the protests in Europe, of course, because, of course, anti-EU groups will join in on these things. But the purpose of the protest is to demand support. Some of it's at the state level, quite a lot of it at the state level, and some of it's been won by some farmers. The French government has agreed to some concessions like compensation for the crops lost last year, not raising the price of diesel as planned, for example. Some of it is aimed at similar levels of support EU-wide, so they're taking their case to the EU as well. None of it is aimed at leaving the EU. None of it is, oh, we wish we were more like British farmers. You tell them, is it a choice between coping now or being like the British farmers? Like, oh, all right then. Now, this is not how the Brexiteers describe it, of course. So what happened? What happened when they go, oh, look at those protesters in France, isn't it brilliant? What happened when someone said, yeah, British farmers are protesting here now? The moment they were trying to say how happy British farmers were with Brexit, and they looked across and go, oh no, our own farmers are blockading Dover, what's going on? They tried to claim that the farmers were protesting cheap food imports from the EU. But this isn't the case. In fact, how could that even make sense? How could EU food coming to Britain be cheaper now than when we were in the EU? We've raised trade barriers. We've made imports more expensive. And although I keep reminding people that we've not raised our trade barriers to EU imports as high as we legally should, and we've not raised them as high as the EU has raised theirs to our exports, they're still there. Customs documentation, now SPS documentation as well. Also, if Brexiteers are claiming that the EU can produce food more cheaply than we can, so it undercuts us in our own market, isn't that a problem with Brexit? Aren't you saying that the EU allows, European farmers to produce food more cheaply? How is that a defence of Brexit? But as it happens, it's not true. A lot of food is now more expensive in Britain, thanks to Brexit, when it used to be quite cheap by European standards. And no, it's not just Russia. Several people I've spoken to recently that have been to France say the food is now clearly cheaper in France than it is now in Britain when they're visited. But that's by the by. The point is that complaining of cheap EU imports makes no sense. Brexit made EU imports more expensive. And like I say, if Brexiteers are claiming that the EU is suddenly able to overcome those extra costs of trade barriers and still undercut our own farmers? That's not a defence of Brexit. But the reality is that British farmers are protesting against cheap imports as a result of our post-Brexit trade deals. You know, the ones where Boris Johnson bent over and allowed the Japanese, Australian, New Zealand governments in turn to give him a good spanking. This is what British farmers are protesting against. The cheap food imports that our Brexit government choose to allow in their race to the bottom with standards. Because post-Brexit rules mean that British farmers have to maintain high standards for their products. So that way they've got to say to the people, oh no, we're maintaining standards, which is great. But those same standards are not maintained for imports. So you consider the position British farmers are in. They have to produce food to a higher standard by law than the British market accepts. So of course they're going to be undercut by people using cheaper, lower quality methods, even if they're at the other side of the world. But it's not even like they can just turn to exporting and say, oh, we'll just sell more to Spain. The same Brexit government that forces them to exceed the standard of their own market raised trade barriers to the markets which would like to buy that produce. So their goods are more expensive in other markets now. More expensive. Absolute nightmare. And that's without the problem that British farmers have always had, going back to even when we're in the EU, because it's nothing to do with the EU, where supermarket contracts squeeze them when the cost of production goes up. So a cost of production goes up for farmers and supermarket says, no, you agreed to supply us at these rates, you'll carry on doing that. So it's like, well, we can't make money now. So the question now becomes, what will the farmers do next? They're obviously not going to get anything from the Tories, who are too busy trying to hold themselves together for the general election. But a new government is coming. Are they going to learn how to protest? Are they going to stop this mindset of, oh, we can't go to London because they'll shoo us away? Because this is not the first time British farmers have protested against Brexit. A few years ago, you probably never noticed, a few years ago they drove, I think it was about 6 tractors through London. And I think some went past a Tory MP's constituency office. I said at the time, this is pathetic. You're driving a motor vehicle down a road. That's not a protest. That's just driving. That's where you're allowed to drive on the road. If you want the government to do something, disrupt the government. 20 years ago, during the fuel protests, lorries blockaded a refinery, as well as conducting go-slows on roads. But the blockading the refinery was the disruption. Disrupt. All protests have to be disruptive, or they're not protests. And the farming sector, like if it acts as one, of course it's got the capacity to face off against authorities in London. I get how it's tricky for a group of people who tend to be disproportionately conservative in their thinking. I get that. But stop doffing your caps. Get yourselves down to London. Don't take any shit from the authorities. In a democracy, the people are the authority. Now, we transfer sovereignty to Parliament in order to act in our interests. But when it chooses to act against our interests, you take that authority back. Like, if we can get farmers to see that, then maybe there'll not only be hope for them, but hope for others as well. Because I'll tell you another thing. If one sector can fight back against Brexit, maybe others can as well. Because almost every sector in our economy is suffering from Brexit. Business leaders are increasingly saying so. Someone showed me yesterday, I think it was, the head of Asda complaining about it. And I said, yeah, there's a lot of complaining nowadays. They were a bit quiet up until now, though, weren't they? Why were they so quiet before? But here's the thing. We're in the situation we are now. Here we are. Most sectors of our economy do not like Brexit. So how much more powerful would it be if they banded together? Instead of trying to earn sector-specific concessions of their own, band together because you all want the same thing. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.